Hey everyone! Before we dive into these chilling true crime tales, I'd like to ask you to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment below. Your support really helps the channel grow. Today, we're doing a deep investigative breakdown of 3 of the most baffling disappearances of the 21st century. These stories stand out as stark examples of how, even with advanced tech and surveillance systems, people can vanish without a trace. We'll focus on examining the digital evidence, systemic failures, and psychological profiles that drove these investigations into dead ends. June 2014. Sunny resort town of Golden Sands, Bulgaria. 28-year-old Lars Mitank, a young man from Berlin, was working at a power plant and, according to co-workers and friends, was socially well-adjusted, physically fit, and had no known legal issues or mental health history. The first part of his trip was documented as a standard, uneventful week of vacation with a group of friends. However, a few days before his scheduled flight home, an incident happened that completely changed his fate. On the night of June 30th, 2014, Lars got caught up in a fight near a local fast food place. The cause of the conflict remains unclear. One version says it stemmed from a soccer argument, another says it involved a woman, but it ended with Lars suffering serious damage to his eardrum. From a medical standpoint, the incident was critical. The doctors in Bulgaria strictly prohibited him from flying home on the scheduled flight on July 7th because of the risk of eardrum perforation due to pressure changes. This decision separated him from his friends, who were supposed to depart July 7th, while he was forced to stay behind completely on his own. He was prescribed antibiotics. It was exactly from this moment, isolated in a foreign land, that his behavior began to change suddenly and dramatically. Isolation, medication, and the injury became catalysts. He moved out of the hotel where he had been staying with his friends into a cheaper place called the Color Hotel, which he believed to be safer, and began showing acute paranoia. Lars became convinced someone was following him. He messaged his mother that he feared for his safety, that 4 men were stalking him, men he believed were trying to locate him because of that fight. In one of his messages, he asked his mother to block his bank cards, fearing someone had found him and was attempting to rob him. This sudden psychological breakdown, happening far from home, became the first unexplained piece of the puzzle. It's worth digging into the details here. His rapid shift from a normal tourist to a paranoid individual within just 48 hours, which demands careful analysis of how stress and medication may have impacted his mind. Lars's growing paranoia reached a breaking point in his conversations with his mother, Lars Mitank, who had become his only remaining connection to reality. Throughout July 7th, he sent her dozens of alarming messages, describing his fears in detail, though never mentioning concrete facts, only his perceptions. One of the most unsettling messages claimed he had spent the entire night hiding in the attic of the Color Hotel, convinced that the people he believed were after him were searching for him in his room. He stopped eating and sleeping, keeping a water bottle nearby as a makeshift tool for self-protection, which led officers to consider that he might be experiencing an acute psychological episode. Sandra, frightened by the sudden shift in his mental state, bought him a new plane ticket. Yet even right before his departure, Lars called her to say that all the information was saved on his phone, but he didn't know how to delete it. This detail, later, led investigators to consider whether, in his final hours, he had encountered some real threat he felt unable to discuss openly. However, the investigation never uncovered evidence of any 4 men or any actual pursuers. The theory that antibiotics played a role was examined thoroughly. While side effects of this medication don't typically include severe psychosis, mixing them with alcohol or dealing with possible concussion effects from the earlier fight might have triggered a strong fear response. In official reports, this period was described as a time of peak irrationality. I've read a few documents that challenge this timeline, suggesting Lars showed unusual behavior even before the fight, but most sources agree that the injury and isolation acted as catalysts for the abrupt breakdown reflected in his digital trail. Everything reached a climax on the morning of July 8, 2014. Lars Mitank arrived at Varna Airport, finally ready to fly home using the ticket his mother had arranged. He checked in and went to see the airport physician, Dr. Kostov, to get medical clearance for the flight. This was his last chance to return home, and it seemed as if the worst was behind him. But right there, inside the safety of the airport, the most dramatic and inexplicable turn took place. Lars was in the doctor's office for only a few minutes. Dr. Kostov confirmed that Lars still couldn't fly because of his eardrum condition and discussed the antibiotics with him. Suddenly, right in the middle of what the doctor described as a completely routine conversation, Lars abruptly cut him off. While still in the room, he glanced out the window at a passing truck or construction vehicle and froze, as if he had seen something terrifying. He muttered that he didn't want to stay in Bulgaria and that they need to check out what's going on, then dropped his carry-on bag, leaving behind all his personal belongings, his phone, and his passport. He sprinted out of the office and ran. Let's examine the evidence. The entire sequence was captured by the airport's surveillance system, becoming one of the most crucial elements in the investigation. The footage shows Lars running through the terminal, passing everyone in his path. Police reports later confirmed that there was no sign anyone was chasing him, and the cameras captured nothing unusual in the window except normal airport traffic. In the last known frame, Lars leaps over a roughly 6-foot-tall fence topped with barbed wire surrounding airport property and disappears into a nearby pine forest. His backpack, phone, and passport remained inside the airport. From that moment on, investigators found not a single piece of evidence pointing to what happened next. After Lars Mitank's disappearance, a large-scale search began, involving Bulgarian law enforcement, private investigators, and his mother, Sandra Mitank, who flew to Varna. The search centered on the pine forest near the airport and the surrounding villages. Search dogs, thermal imaging devices, and drones were deployed, but with no results. Extensive efforts carried out under legal procedures failed to uncover even one physical trace indicating the direction Lars took after crossing the fence. Investigators proposed several main theories. First, an accident or self-harm in the forest, triggered by a psychotic episode. But despite extensive, methodical searches, no biological traces, clothing, or remnants were ever found. That left the theory unconfirmed and purely speculative. Second, someone may have picked him up on the road adjacent to the forest. This could have been either a good Samaritan offering help, or it might have been a case of abduction. Third, the least likely, that the people Lars believed were following him actually existed and were waiting in the woods. The absence of any concrete evidence brought legal proceedings to a halt. The case was officially classified as a missing person under circumstances not ruling out third-party involvement. But with no direct proof of foul play, the investigation quickly lost priority. The disappearance of Lars Mitank remains one of the most high-profile missing person cases of the modern era. Remarkable because it had a near-perfect trail of evidence in the form of surveillance footage, and yet remains completely unsolved. And here's the question I keep coming back to. How is that even possible? How can someone acting in such a frantic, irrational state vanish without a trace from one of the most secure locations, leaving behind nothing but a video of their escape? While European investigators were combing the forests of Bulgaria looking for Lars, another strange disappearance, this one even more puzzling, had already gone unsolved in the United States for 8 years. This case also involved a surveillance failure and an architectural mystery. We're talking about Brian Schaffer, a 27-year-old med student from Ohio State University who vanished on the night of April 1st, 2006. Brian was smart, driven, and in his second year of medical school. He had a good relationship with his girlfriend, Alexis Westcott, and the two were planning a wedding in the Bahamas. He was socially well-adjusted and popular. But just a month before he vanished, Brian suffered a major personal loss: the death of his mother from cancer. Friends say that loss weighed heavily on him, even though outwardly he seemed composed. He disappeared inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a bar located on the second floor of a shopping complex in a busy area of Columbus, Ohio. The location of his disappearance is what made this case such a baffling mystery. The bar had only one public entrance and exit leading to the street, and it was under constant surveillance. There was a second exit, used by staff only, but it led to a service elevator and stairwell that were locked after hours. This created a major investigative challenge. Logically, Brian should have been caught on camera leaving the bar, but he wasn't. Police quickly ruled out the idea that he somehow slipped past the main entrance unnoticed, because the cameras clearly captured every person entering and leaving. I don't think the conclusions here are obvious. Far from it. In fact, the very location of his disappearance is what proves that even with modern security systems, there can still be blind spots, places where someone can just vanish. On the night of March 31st, Brian was out with his friend Clint Laird. During the night, Brian called his girlfriend Alexis and promised he'd be home soon. The last time Brian was seen was on the surveillance footage outside the bar. Let's dig into the evidence. The camera clearly recorded him entering at 1:55 a.m., saying goodbye to two women before walking back inside. That's where the mystery truly begins. The security cameras at the main entrance were working properly and recording continuously. Brian's friends were waiting for him. The footage clearly showed every person leaving the bar after closing time at 2 a.m. His friends, the staff, everyone. But Brian Schaffer? He never appeared on camera. He never walked out. Faced with this mystery, police first considered the possibility that another person may have briefly blocked Brian from the camera's view. But a thorough technical analysis ruled out any such blind spot. Investigators went over the footage again and again, slow motion, frame by frame, and still, Brian wasn't seen leaving with any group. That made his disappearance physically unexplainable. The only remaining theory, that he exited in a way that somehow avoided being captured, would have required an almost impossible combination of timing, angles, or even premeditated planning. And nothing ever supported that. His complete absence from the footage, despite only one public exit and constant recording, became the central failure in the entire evidence review. Once the missing person report came in, law enforcement hit a total paradox, one that stalled the entire legal process. How does someone leave a building with only one public exit and not get caught on camera? Investigators explored every hypothetical route. The first involved the service exit, which led to an elevator and rooftop area. But staff confirmed the door was locked and access without clearance was strictly forbidden. The idea that he disguised himself in employee clothing or somehow escaped via the roof was also investigated, but no proof ever surfaced. Detectives reviewed hundreds of hours of footage from other nearby surveillance systems. Not a single trace of Brian turned up. His cell phone pinged a final signal from a tower several miles from the bar at around 4 a.m., just a few hours after his last known location, but then it went silent. That signal raised even more questions. It didn't confirm whether he was still at the bar or whether he had somehow left on foot. Digital forensics couldn't prove if the phone was turned off manually or if the battery died. And the exact location of that last ping was never confirmed. And again, here's the question. How is that even possible? He doesn't appear on any camera leaving the building, yet his phone remains active hours later. That suggests he may have left quickly, or was taken. Detectives later admitted that the first few hours of the investigation were filled with procedural missteps. The building wasn't searched thoroughly enough. Security specialists weren't brought in right away to identify potential blind spots or anomalies in the bar's layout. In the absence of answers, investigators were forced to develop multiple theories in an attempt to explain something that seemed physically impossible. The first theory was self-harm or an accidental fall in an off-limits area of the building. A thorough search, including basements and maintenance areas, turned up nothing. The second theory gained wider public attention, that Brian voluntarily disappeared. Some pointed out that he'd been emotionally affected by his mother's passing. But that idea didn't hold up. He'd left behind all his money, ID, and had a wedding planned. Do you think that's possible? That someone preparing for a future would suddenly vanish without leaving a single clue behind? The only person ever considered a serious suspect, if only briefly, was Brian's friend, Clint Laird. He didn't fully cooperate with the police at first and failed his initial polygraph test. After taking a second one and passing, he was removed from the suspect list. To this day, Brian Schaffer's disappearance remains one of the most infamous locked room mysteries of the 21st century. His case proves that even with security cameras rolling 24/7, technology can't always explain what defies basic logic. When a disappearance itself contradicts physical laws we can test and prove, it becomes something far more chilling. And while the cases of Lars Mitank and Brian Schaffer make us ask how someone can vanish from the physical world, the story we're about to dive into next forces us to ask a different kind of question. What was going on inside the victim's mind? Where is the line between reality and something more, orchestrated? This case is a maze of impossible physics, shadowy corporate ties, and cryptic messages still being decoded by amateur sleuths and cryptographers around the globe. Let's head to Baltimore, Maryland. May 2006. Rivera, 32 years old, looked like the living embodiment of the American dream. He was a talented screenwriter, videographer, and writer, tall, athletic, charismatic. He had recently moved to Baltimore with his wife, Allison, to work for a financial publishing firm called Stansberry and Associates, run by his longtime friend Porter Stansberry. Ray had no known mental health history. He was happily married. He had plans for the future. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, something was building. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Allison began to notice changes. Ray was growing anxious. He insisted on having her with him everywhere. There were signs of paranoia, similar to what we saw in the Lars Mitank case, but more subtle, harder to see. May 16th, 2006. Allison left town on a business trip. Ray stayed home, working on a personal project. That evening, Allison's colleague Claudia was visiting their home. Around 6:30 p.m., Ray received a call on his cell phone. The call was short, but his reaction was immediate and alarming. According to Claudia, Ray heard something on the other end of the line, then suddenly bolted from the house. He left in such a hurry that he didn't even turn off the lights, left his computer running, and, most strangely, he didn't take anything with him except his car keys and phone. He ran out in cheap flip-flops, left behind his glasses without which he couldn't see well, and vanished. It was like he intended to be back in 5 minutes. But no one ever saw him alive again. When Ray didn't come home that night, Allison and his family raised the alarm. A large-scale search began. A week later, on May 23rd, his Toyota was found in a downtown Baltimore parking garage. The car was in good condition, but there was a parking ticket on the windshield. The detail that raised eyebrows? The car was parked near the historic Belvadier Hotel, a grand early 20th century building, once the center of social life in Baltimore, now converted into upscale condos and offices. Ray's friends and family searched around the building, and that's when they noticed something the police had missed: a hole in the roof of a lower annex connected to the hotel. It was small, but big enough for a body to have passed through. Police accessed the room beneath the hole and made a disturbing discovery. Ray Rivera's body was lying in a long abandoned conference space, part of what used to be the hotel's swimming area. At first glance, the conclusion seemed obvious. Ray had taken his own life. A fall from the 13th floor of the hotel, crashing through the roof, ending in tragedy. Baltimore police leaned into that theory quickly. But when detectives and independent experts began reconstructing the events, the case evolved into one of the most complex physical puzzles of modern times. Let's dig into the physical evidence, because that's where the official explanation starts to fall apart. First off, the trajectory. The hole in the annex roof was 43 feet out from the edge of the Belvadier's main rooftop. For someone to hit that spot falling from the 13th floor, they wouldn't just have to step off the ledge. They'd have to launch themselves with the speed of a trained sprinter, around 11 miles per hour, and make an explosive leap. Now picture that. Ray was wearing flip-flops, running at full speed across a rooftop in flimsy sandals, and then making a perfectly aimed Olympic-style jump into the void. It sounds absurd. Second, his injuries. The medical examiner confirmed that Ray suffered multiple fractures, legs, ribs, skull trauma, all consistent with a high fall. But here's the twist. Some forensic experts argued that the damage to his legs suggested a perfectly vertical drop, almost like a pencil dive. That's physically inconsistent with the kind of horizontal momentum he'd need to reach that rooftop hole. You can't both leap 43 feet and fall straight down. Third, and perhaps most baffling, were his personal items. Ray's glasses, the same ones he supposedly forgot to take, and his cell phone were found next to his body on the rooftop. Intact. The phone still worked. The glasses weren't even cracked. Now think about that. A man falls 13 stories, breaks through a metal roof, sustains devastating injuries, but his phone and glasses walk away without a scratch. That defies basic physics. Many researchers believe this strongly suggests staging, that those items may have been placed there after the fact. When the physical evidence leads to a dead end, the psychological clues open a door to something far stranger. After Ray's body was discovered, investigators searched his home. There, Allison found something chilling. Taped to the back of his computer tower, folded tightly, almost hidden, was a tiny piece of paper printed in small font. This wasn't a farewell note. It read more like a cipher or a script for a game. The document opened and closed with Masonic-style phrases like brothers and sisters and whomever it may concern. In the middle, Ray listed names of deceased public figures, including actor Christopher Reeve and filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, along with a set of living friends and colleagues, asking that they be made 5 years younger. He mentioned a council and the phrase, "The game is over." What really caught the attention of investigators were the references to David Fincher's movie, The Game. If you've seen it, you know the plot. A man is dragged into a mysterious role-playing experience that blurs the line between reality and fiction. In one of the climactic scenes, the main character jumps off a hotel roof, straight through a glass ceiling, and survives. Now combine that with Ray's note, his death, and the physical circumstances surrounding it. It all feels a little too eerie to be coincidence. So what was really going on here? Was this a case of undiagnosed psychosis? Maybe a sudden break with reality? Or was Ray somehow caught up in some bizarre corporate experiment or secret ritual that spiraled out of control? Psychological analysis of the note showed Ray was in a state of heightened mental activity, but not depression. He wrote about wanting to wake up, about the evolution of human knowledge. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a statement about moving into a new state of being. But the question is, was that state madness or something external? Here we are again, facing the same themes of blind spots and system failures, just like in the Brian Schaffer case. The Belvadier Hotel was outfitted with a security system. Cameras covered the lobby, elevators, and rooftop access points. But when investigators requested the footage from the evening of May 16th, what they discovered was staggering. At the exact time Rivera is believed to have entered the building, the cameras were down due to a technical malfunction. There was no footage of Ray entering the hotel. None showing him taking the elevator, none capturing him on the rooftop, and access to the roof? It was strictly limited. Doors were locked, and you couldn't get through without a key or access code. So, how did Ray get up there, past security, past the locks, and completely off camera? Investigators also faced unexpected resistance from Ray's employer. The company, Stansberry and Associates, immediately restricted all employees from speaking with police. Ray's longtime friend, Porter Stansberry, refused to comment, citing legal advice. It created an eerie silence, an informational vacuum. And what about the phone call? The one that sent Ray racing out of his home in flip-flops? It was traced. It came from a switchboard inside Stansberry's office, but due to an outdated internal phone system, investigators couldn't determine exactly which extension placed the call. So who called Ray that night? And what was said that made him leave everything behind and head to the Belvadier? Ray Rivera's case was officially closed with an undetermined cause of death. Authorities leaned toward self-harm, but with unclear motives. His family and independent investigators strongly disagreed. Several theories have emerged over the years, trying to make sense of this web of contradictions. Staged scene. Ray may have lost his life elsewhere, possibly beaten, which would explain some of the fractures not typically caused by a fall, and his body later placed or dropped in the annex to stage the scene. That would explain the intact phone and glasses, and the missing footage. But who could pull off such a precise operation in the middle of downtown Baltimore? Psychological break. Maybe Ray lost touch with reality. Maybe he believed he was part of a hidden challenge, like the movie The Game, or some secret Masonic trial. He found a way to the roof and jumped, convinced it was all part of the script. This theory aligns with his note and odd behavior, but it still doesn't explain the physics, or the pristine condition of his belongings. Silenced. Witness. Working on financial publications, Ray might have uncovered something he wasn't supposed to see. His death could have been a warning, or a way to silence him permanently. Ray Rivera's case, just like those of Lars Mitank and Brian Schaffer, highlights something terrifying: how vulnerable a person can be in the face of the unknown. In Lars's story, we see the mind turn on itself, pushing someone to run from invisible threats. In Brian's case, we see how the environment and surveillance tech fail, erasing a man from existence. And in Ray's story, we see a blend of all of it: the psychological mystery, the system malfunction, and the impossible physics. What unites all three stories is one chilling truth. In the 21st century, when every step we take supposedly leaves a digital or physical trace, it is still possible to disappear in such a way that even top experts, armed with terabytes of data and hours of footage, can't piece the puzzle together. We like to believe every action has a cause, every mystery a solution. But these stories, Lars, Brian, Ray, remain open wounds in our understanding of reality. They remind us that sometimes the truth isn't just hidden. It may be permanently trapped in a surveillance blind spot, a dark forest, or a coded note no one can ever decode. That's where we'll leave today's analysis. If you've got theories about how Ray Rivera made that jump, or what really happened to Brian Schaffer, drop them in the comments below. Maybe together, we'll find the key. Take care of yourselves. See you in the next episode.